Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Marlena Frank and I'm a YA fantasy and horror author. Today I'm continuing my Scrivener tutorial series. Although I plan for this to be the last video in this series, I will be posting up a version of the entire series without music as I've had requested multiple times. So look for that to come soon. I'm also planning on doing more author tutorial videos covering websites or software that I've found useful in my 10 years of writing. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. If you're following along in the Scrivener tutorial playlist, this is part 7. Again, I'm not sponsored for any of these tutorials, but I hope they help. Today we'll talk about the scratch pad and compiling your manuscript. Time to dig in! So we're back in our very modified sample Scrivener file again. First of all, we're going to look at the scratch pad. There are a lot of ways to keep notes in Scrivener, and when I first started using the program, the scratch pad was very useful. I liked the idea of having all my notes organized and stored in one place. To access it, go to Tools, then click on Scratch Pad. One feature that I like about Scrivener is that it will often show you the keyboard shortcut to access a feature. For the scratch pad on Windows, you'll notice that it's Control plus Shift plus 0. Now, when you open Scratchpad for the first time, you'll see that you automatically have an untitled note. On the yellow box, just type in whatever text you want to associate with that note. So here, I'll type in some text. At the bottom, you'll see a series of buttons. On the left is the option to add an additional note to the scratch pad. Next, we can delete a selected note. There's also the option to grab a screenshot from your computer to enter into the note. I won't cover this particular function in this tutorial because I found the screenshot doesn't work well for high-resolution screens. However, Windows has the snipping tool, which I found to be very useful in grabbing computer screenshots. Next, you'll see options for the Scratchpad window. You can choose to have the window split horizontally, as seen automatically, or vertically. It also has the option for a transparent window, which means if you have the Scratchpad open while you're working on other applications, it'll appear transparent over your other applications, making it easy to jot down notes while doing research. Next, you have the option to send a file to Scrivener. This is similar to what we did with the name generator in the previous Scrivener tutorial video. To see an example of that, go check out part 6. So let's add a new note. Click on the far left button to add a new note. We're going to double click on the title to change it to Don't Forget, because that's how I use these notes. Now let's add in something we need to remember for our manuscript. Perfect. Now we can click on our original note up here, and then click on that second button to delete it. You'll get a warning that pops up to let you know that when you remove the file from disk, it cannot be undone. While the scratch pad is very useful, this is an important piece to remember. Let's click OK. Now we can click OK to close out Scratchpad. Notice that when we open it up again by going to Tools, Scratchpad, all of our notes are exactly how we left them. Next, let's look at one of the more complex features of Scrivener, compiling your manuscript. So when do you want to compile your book? Usually when you're ready to hand your book off to beta readers, to send it off for submission, or when you want to work on editing your story you'll want it to be in a different format than Scrivener. Something like Word is usually preferred. While Scrivener does have some spell checking, it doesn't have as many tools for spelling and grammar checking like Word does. Word also has extensive revision tracking. With this setup, I'm focusing on the Standard Manuscript Format, which I'll be linking in the description below. This is pretty standard for almost all short story and book submissions, and is a good rule of thumb for any manuscript you plan to send out. Even when they say they don't care about formatting, it can never hurt to make sure your work looks good. When you get ready to compile, make sure that the files you want to use are in the manuscript folder. These are the files that will be available to compile. When you're ready, click on File, then Compile. Now, the first time you open this, it will be a small window with limited options. You'll see it wanting to format as custom, or you may see some other option listed there. It will also likely choose Print as your default option. Usually, you'll want to customize this way more though. Click on the blue down arrow to expand your options. So you'll start out in the Contents tab. This is where you can choose exactly what pieces of your manuscript you want to include. The drop-down for manuscript only lets you choose subsections of your manuscript folder, which is why we had to double-check that earlier. You'll see every scene and chapter of your book listed here, and you can choose to include it or not with the checkbox. If you've been following along in this tutorial, you'll remember that the inspector also had an Include checkbox you could use. This is where that would be handy. In this example, we're going to uncheck Scene 3 of Chapter 2. Now for adding front matter, Scrivener has a number of templates built in that you can include at the front of your book. You can also add any custom front matter that you've built in Scrivener already. In this example, we're going to add the paperback novel options, and you'll see they get added to the compile listing. We're also going to change the compile file type to Word. If you leave it on print, it will pull up your default printer and send the full document there. Next, let's look at the Separators tab. The text separator here by default is a £. This is pretty standard in most short stories and novels, so I recommend keeping that. The rest of these can be left alone. Next, we come to the Formatting tab. Now this section I find requires some trial and error. This lets you choose the formatting for each folder level and each document level of your manuscript. So your level 1 folder is listed as parts of your book by default, and the level 2 and beyond are listed as chapters. So let's say you wanted your book to be in Times New Roman at 12-point font. Here's how you would set that. Now in this example, I choose the wrong level, as you'll soon see, but I'll also show you how to easily fix your font in Word. To fix this in Scrivener, you have to choose every section of your area and change the font manually. It's kind of a pain, and usually I leave this as default and fix it in Word, but here are the steps so you can see it for yourself. Next, we'll look at the Transformations tab. Some options I recommend keeping are to straighten smart quotes. Save your editor the headache. Also, depending on the editor you're working with, they may prefer EM dashes to double hyphens. When in doubt, keep the EM dashes. uncheck the Convert Italics to Underline and check the box to convert underline to italics. We're going to be putting this book into Times New Roman, so you really don't need underlines. You'll thank yourself during your first round of edits, but you don't have to fix that manually. Don't be like me. For the mark end of text, usually it's best just to leave it with end. On the Replacements tab, we can leave that alone. Same for the Footnotes and Comments tab. Finally, on the Page Setup tab, you'll want to make sure your margins are all set to 1 inch. You'll want your paper size to be, of course, set to letter and the orientation to portrait. Typically, you don't want your page numbering to count page 1 because that's your title page. So the formatting you see here is important. Your header should be your last name, your title, and you can leave the code for the page numbering as is. You can change your header and footer font to be Times New Roman at 12-point font too. Now before we compile this, let me mention the Save Preset and the Load Preset buttons down here. Once you do some trial and error with your formatting for your compilers, you can save that preset and it will show you where it's saving it on your computer. For your next project, you can just load that same preset and save yourself the trouble of going through this again. I highly recommend it, and as you tweak it, make sure you save it as you go. I'm going to enter a name for this preset. Then click OK. Now, let's click on Compile and see how we did. It prompts you for where you want to save it and for a file name. Once you enter that, you'll get a confirmation that it completed. Let's go take a look. You'll see our title isn't exactly right, but we can change that. We can also enter our full name. It also stubbed out a copyright page for us and a dedication page. It also kept the parts in, unfortunately, and the chapter headings are all off. Remember what I said about trial and error with those? It's a process. However, our section separators look great, and our chapter dividers and formatting looks perfect, so it does require some cleanup, but not too much. To quickly and easily change the font in your Word document, click on the Home tab at the top. In the Editing section on the far right, click on Select, then choose Select All. Then you can choose Times New Roman and 12-point font for the size. This is what I usually do rather than deal with the tedious font sizes in the compiler. To fix your header, just double-click on the surname variable and enter your surname. Then click on the stubbed out title and enter your story's title. Then click back on the main text of your document. Again, using the compiler isn't perfect, but I'll personally deal with the few formatting pains with it in exchange for all the writing tools of Scrivener. That concludes this tutorial, and I want to thank everyone who has stayed with me and watched all of the videos in this series. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope it gets you excited to explore Scrivener more. If you enjoyed this tutorial, I hope you'll hit that thumbs up button and subscribe. I've really enjoyed making these, and I'm looking forward to making more tutorials for you guys. Thank you once again for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Happy writing!